Here we go with another edition of Why Wasn't It Better? I'm your host, Patrick Darms.
And I'm Anton Paras.
And this is the podcast where we discuss hyped up, somewhat disappointing films. We're going to tell you the film that we chose. We're going to tell you why we chose it for this episode. We're going to tell you how it got made. And then we're going to provide a few different reasons that answer the question, why wasn't it better? Just a friendly reminder that our podcast is still very much in its infancy. So if you like what you hear, please do give us a like, a follow, a 5-star rating, as well as all the positive word of mouth promotion that you deem fit. You can follow us on Twitter at WWIB Podcast. And Anton, are we going to make an Instagram at some point?
I think so. We'll have that Instagram there for all of our folks that love to plug in on that Instagram life.
Was a question I got from a listener. They're like, you're on Twitter, why not Instagram? I didn't have a good answer. So if you'd like to get in touch with us directly with any questions, comments, or general feedback, you can email us at wwibpodcast@gmail.com. Before we get into today's film, I did have a couple of listener questions that I thought that we could address in our admin. Anton, one listener asked us to explain our rating system a bit. You know, we've been grading these films A through F scale. We haven't given anything an F yet, but this listener asked us if we could just explain what goes into the methodology behind this. What constitutes an A versus a B?
My thoughts are absolutely not. We will not share that. We will hold it close to the vest. Nah, just kidding.
Like school.
We'll talk through it.
Yeah, so we wrote up some notes to answer this question. We'll go from the top down. So anything that's A plus is like flawless, like an all-time great movie. And A is, I would say, outstanding, like a deserved classic.
Yeah, so kind of going on for that same formula, A minus, of course, excellent film with some minor quibbles here and there. We start to go into the B range with B plus as a great film, highly rewatchable. B in very good, so plenty of stuff to love, but maybe not enough to make it a true classic. And B minus, it's a good film, has its issues, but you can overlook them. And then Patrick brings us to the C range.
Yeah, C plus is one of the more interesting ratings, I think, because I have in my notes here above average, pretty good with some flaws that you can't overlook. A lot of films probably fall into that category. Now, C is exactly what it sounds like. A C is just bang on average, probably equal parts good and bad. Obviously, there's some subjectivity involved in all these ratings. A C minus means slightly below average, probably more bad than good, aka significant flaws. Now we get into the D territory.
So D plus, that's far below average, but just starting to dip into the badness. D, bad with at least one major redeeming quality. D minus, horrible, almost no chance of rewatching. And then that gives us then to F. So this is trash. This is absolute garbage, ranging to all-time bad. Note there are levels of Fs.
Oh, yeah. I don't know exactly what they are, but there's definitely levels to this. There's F minus, minus, minus. There's at least one or two films that we have on our list that are so bad I wouldn't even feel comfortable giving it an F. I won't spoil it.
There's F, crime against humanity.
There is. I can't remember what episode it was. Oh, no. I think I referred to Superman 3 as like a war crime.
Yeah, that's a good one. That's F, war crime category.
Yeah. Now, Anton and I were talking a little about this rating system just before we started recording this. We may amend this at some point. We may go to a 10 scale. We may go just to the very classic star rating system, like 5 stars. This is subject to change, but as of now, we're going to stick with this A through F scale. And the other question that we got, Anton, from a listener is, as far as movies go, are we excited for anything upcoming? They mentioned Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny. Are you excited for this movie?
That's a really loaded question. Am I excited for the next Indiana Jones movie?
Yeah.
I don't think excited is quite the word that comes to mind for me. I think I'm more like, I want to go see it, but I'm keeping my expectations pretty tempered.
I agree with you. I'm definitely going to see it. Right. I have no expectations for it. It could be horrible. It could be great. I really don't know what to think. I do know that James Mangold is a very good director. I like the work that he's done so far. I liked Logan. I liked Ford versus Ferrari.
We shall
Seems
see.
like the right director for it. Now, of course, that begs the question, if it's not directed by Steven Spielberg and if George Lucas isn't really involved, is it really an Indiana Jones movie?
Well, fair enough. And I think that that probably starts to touch on the question, do we perhaps want to also touch on films on the podcast that are in theaters as well?
Yes, I think we are going to do that.
All right, well that's just
We're
a bit of a teaser. Let's put a pin on that.
And with that being said, Anton, let's get into this week's selection for this podcast. Would you like to introduce the film that I've chosen?
Let's dig in here into the film Gangs of New York. So, the setting, Amsterdam Valen is a young Irish immigrant who has spent most of his childhood in an orphanage. He returns to the 5 Points seeking revenge against his father's killer, William Cunning, aka Bill the Butcher, a powerful anti-immigrant gang leader. He knows that revenge can only be attained by infiltrating Cutting's inner circle. In Amsterdam's journey becomes a fight for personal survival and to find a place for the Irish people in 1860s New York. The film was released on December 20th, 2002 by Miramax Films and Touchstone Pictures, directed by Martin Scorsese, with a screenplay by Jay Cox, Steven Zalian, and Kenneth Lonergan, starring Daniel Day-Lewis, Leonardo DiCaprio, Cameron Diaz, Henry Thomas, Jim Broadbent, Brendan Gleeson, John C. Reilly, and Liam Neeson, with a budget at $100 million and a box office coming in at $197 million. So, a lot of great details there setting up for a film that, one, I absolutely love this movie. But, Patrick, why was this movie chosen?
Well, we've covered a lot of major blockbusters so far in the in the films that we've chosen. We've done a Batman movie, we've done Tron, Matrix, right? Some pretty big movies. I was interested in doing a movie that's considered something, what some people would say a little bit more boutique. Martin Scorsese, I think it's safe to say fits that bill. My father is the one that actually convinced me to get excited to see this movie back when it was, before it was released sometime in 2002. When we saw the teaser trailer, he made it clear that like we were going to see this in the theaters when it came out. My dad, he's a Scorsese fan, and he's a big fan of Daniel Day-Lewis. And the more I read about the movie, being the nerd that I was at 14 years old when this was coming out, I got excited for it as well. This had been a well-known passion project of Martin Scorsese's, going back decades.
Excellent.
Daniel Day-Lewis, who had already had built up a considerable mystique by this point, he was once again teaming up with Scorsese. So it was a very big deal. We take it for granted now, but this was the first of multiple collaborations between Scorsese and Leonardo DiCaprio. Leo's involvement should not be understated either. He was just a couple years coming off of Titanic, which was the biggest movie in the world. He was one of the biggest stars in the world. Now, the last film that we covered that I think we both agreed had the highest potential for greatness, not necessarily the greatest, but the highest potential for it, that was American Gangster, right? I think this film usurps it. If you consider who directed it, who starred in it, you mentioned the cast. It's a star-studded cast, plus the subject matter. The hype for this movie was pretty big. Now, it's not quite on the same level of hype that like something like The Matrix Reloaded or a Batman movie is going to have. You don't really expect Scorsese's movies to light the box office on fire. Despite a recent string of box office bombs that he had made prior to this movie, he made that movie about the Buddhist monks, and then the ambulance movie with was Nicolas Cage in that, I think.
But we can think of this film really as it was Scorsese dipping into Oscar bait, would one say?
Right. He had a pretty stellar reputation. You mentioned the Oscars. There was a lot of buzz about this movie and how it would finally win Scorsese his long-awaited Academy Award. And Harvey Weinstein, who produced this movie, this is, of course, a Miramax film, he exerted a lot of campaign muscle at the Academy Awards. This movie ended up coming out a full year later than was originally planned. And the universal consensus was that it just should have been better. Everyone expected a masterpiece, including me. We've cited how Rotten Tomatoes doesn't necessarily mean everything, but we usually mention it on these episodes. This has a 72% on Rotten Tomatoes. So it wasn't universally loved, but it did get 10 Oscar nominations, including Best Picture, completely shut out, didn't even win one. Most people expected Daniel Day-Lewis to win Best Actor. He won pretty much universal acclaim for his performance, but he didn't get it.
Was
Now,
that the year Adrian Brody won for The Pianist?
yes.
Yep. There we go.
I don't want to hate on Adrian Brody because he is incredible in that movie. We have a love-hate relationship with the Oscars. This is the reason why I don't like the Oscars. It's like you're praising someone to hate on someone else. Some people felt that, Adrian Brody, like, quote unquote, stole this Oscar from Daniel Day-Lewis. Whether you agree with that or not, Adrian Brody was incredible in that movie, and that should not take away from the performance that he gave.
Agreed. Totally.
Now, so 20 years later, or more than 20 years after this film came out, I think it has a strange legacy because Scorsese has such a long list of bangers that I'd say most people would probably consider this movie good. But I mentioned the pedigree, right? Who's in it, who's directed it, the subject matter. We all expected it to be like an all-timer. I always felt there was something missing from this movie. The hype to results ratio, it never added up for me, and that's why I chose it. What about your memories of this movie?
So what's really funny about this film is I remember the Oscar buzz around it when I was younger, and I think that while I never saw it when I was younger, it would definitely like still stick to me as a memory of this. There was a lot of hype for this film. I actually revisited Gangs in New York and then watched it as a full when I was in college, and at that point I feel like my taste for films had changed quite considerably since I was a kid. At that same time, I was also looking at films with a very different lens, looking at things like cinematography, looking at things of the blocking, looking at things like how is the story being told and the pacing. And I fell in love with Gangs in New York. So for me, they're really, I can see they're definitely, I cannot deny that there are definitely things to criticize about the film, but I absolutely love Gangs in New York. I think it is really up there, but don't want to get too ahead of myself. I love that we're going to be able to touch on a few of these things, and I'm excited to defend it as much as I can. But definitely for me, there's just so many qualities about this film that really shows care and detail to the storytelling process and a lot of why that I think that the movie does have as much staying power as it does. Patrick, do you want to talk us through the production history a bit?
Yes. So I mentioned how much of a passion project this was for Martin Scorsese. In 1970, Scorsese read Herbert Asbury's The Gangs of New York, which is a book published in 1927 about the city's 19th century criminal underworld, and he became obsessed with adapting it into a film. Scorsese saw the potential for an American epic about the battle for the modern American democracy. Now, of course, the tagline of this movie is America was born in the streets. He said later in an interview with the Smithsonian, quote, "The country was up for grabs and New York was a powder keg. This was the America not of the West with its wide open spaces, but of claustrophobia where everyone was crushed together. It was chaos, tribal chaos. Gradually, there was a street by street, block by block working out of democracy as people learned somehow to live together. If democracy didn't happen in New York, it wasn't going to happen anywhere." End quote. Now, he eventually managed to acquire the film rights in 1979, but he wasn't able to gain any traction getting the film made. He was turned down by nearly every major studio that he brought this project to. Universal, Disney, Warner Brothers, Fox, Paramount, and MGM all turned him down. The closest he came to getting financing was in 1991 and then at some point in 1997. Now, the biggest challenge facing him was there was the immense difficulty of recreating mid 19th century Manhattan, as almost nothing in New York City looked as it did in that time. Filming elsewhere was never an option for Scorsese. And then finally in 1999, he forged a partnership with the now canceled Harvey Weinstein, noted producer and then co chairman of Miramax Films. Harvey Weinstein is someone that's been in the news with the Me Too movement. He's, universally regarded as just this immense piece of shit.
Right.
Back around the turn of the millennium, he is one of, if not the most powerful person in Hollywood.
Right. He was it's fair to say that the man knew how to get things done in Hollywood and how to put
Yeah,
put films in positions to succeed in the box office as well as to get them in the right buzz once Oscar season came around.
definitely. So, screenwriter Jay Cox, who had been friends with Scorsese going back to the 70s, he was hired to write the screenplay, and it went through at least 9 revised drafts by March of 2000. The production ended up in Cinecittà Studios in Rome, Italy, to build the Five Points New York set. It's funny how Scorsese didn't want to initially film anywhere but New York, and of course, they ended up in Rome. Production designer Dante Ferretti recreated a mile of mid 19th century neighborhood. We're talking about an area consisting of 5 square blocks. In our last episode, Superman
Right.
2, we heavily criticized how crappy the sets looked, and we talked about location shooting versus on set. Gangs of New York is an example of the latter working brilliantly. I would have given the Oscar to Ferretti and set decorator Francesca Lo. Now, we mentioned this movie was like shut out at the Oscars. Lord of the Rings, The Two Towers, did not win for art direction. I know you probably thought that, but I think Chicago won that musical. I don't know how this didn't win for production design because the sets in this
They
movie are phenomenal.
I'll say this, the 5 points look like shit, and I mean that in the best way
Yeah,
possible.
yeah, it's some of the best production design I've ever seen in a movie. I'll give it that. Ferretti relied on artist George Catlin's paintings for reference. Now, sets included a 5 block area of lower Manhattan, including the Five Point Slum, a section of the East River waterfront, including 2 full size sailing ships, a 30 building stretch over lower Broadway, a mansion and replicas of Tammany Hall, a church, a saloon, a Chinese theater, a casino, and you'll appreciate this, Anton. When George Lucas visited the massive set, he told Scorsese, quote, sets like that can be done with computers now, end quote. Ugh. Do you want to talk about the casting decisions?
Yeah, so looking in the notes, there is a lot to consider here. One, it sounds like Daniel Day-Lewis and DiCaprio were going to be in on this very early on, but there are definitely a lot of questions about Cameron Diaz in this film, who is through the years, and there's been a lot of questions about that particular casting decision. So Daniel Day-Lewis, of course, was persuaded to come out of semi-retirement by the fact that he had enjoyed working with Scorsese so much on The Age of Innocence. Christina Applegate, Kate Beckinsale, Lara Flynn Boyle, Jennifer Connelly, Kirsten Dunst, Eliza Dushku, Claire Forlani, Anna Friel, Heather Graham, Bryce Ellis Howard, Kate Hudson, Alyssa Milano, Brittany Murphy, Gwyneth Paltrow, Natalie Portman, Monica Potter, Christina Ricci, Winona Ryder, Alicia Silverstone, Vanessa Shaw, and Mina Savari were considered and auditioned for the role of Jenny Everdeen. Quite a list of people that probably could have
Yeah,
had a better chance at bat.
pick any one of them.
Yeah. So Sarah Michelle Gellar was originally cast as Jenny. So the Buffy the Vampire Slayer,
Yeah.
which she backed out of because of scheduling complications with Buffy the Vampire Slayer. And Scorsese chose Sarah Polley for the part, but later casts Cameron Diaz after the studio insisted he pick a more bankable star. So Cameron Diaz was unhappy that her 6-week contract kept getting extended. She would end up spending 6 months working on this movie. There's enough said about Cameron Diaz and in that role that gives enough of a hint for how we thought about her portrayal.
Yeah, I
But
got plenty to say about her
oh
later.
yeah,
Thanks,
but
Harvey.
yeah, thanks. So Scorsese originally wanted Liam Neeson to play Monk McGinn, who would end up being played by Brendan Gleeson. Excellent. And Neeson asked to play Priest Valen instead, which was again two very fantastic actors. Principal photography began on December 18th, 2000 and ended on March 3rd, 2001 with an original release date of Christmas 2001. Now, Scorsese mainstay Robert De Niro and Willem Dafoe had to leave the production due to conflicts with other films. And this is where we can talk about some Scorsese and DiCaprio. Patrick, what are your thoughts on Scorsese?
I don't honestly know because he's undoubtedly one of the best directors we have. But I was mentioning to you before we started recording, we were looking at his filmography, and I was like, I don't rewatch a lot of Scorsese movies, and I don't know why
Mm-hmm.
that is. I like a lot of his movies. This is probably going to sound like blasphemous, but I don't find a lot of his movies rewatchable, even though I appreciate them. And I wish I had an explanation for you,
I mean,
but I don't.
it's an interesting take. I mean, I've, of course, am in the camp of I'm a fan of Scorsese. Not all of his films are as great in my opinion. Like I definitely do go back and watch Goodfellas again from time to time. I do think it's a great film. But
Definitely.
at the same time, I think that there are other parts to Scorsese and what he chooses to direct that I find very admirable. He definitely has a type of film he likes to shoot, subject matter that he likes to direct, things
And
that he's
return
very
to.
passionate about,
Yeah.
clearly, right?
Yeah.
So I think that in that I have a lot of respect because there's clearly a lot of passion into the films that Scorsese puts together.
Definitely. I respect him as a filmmaker. This is partly due to the reputation that he's built for himself, but he is never someone who just does something for a paycheck.
Scorsese is entranced by the American story, and with that, a very like the American story as it ties to very personal stories and themes that people can share through generations, whether that's longing for what is it to call home, tales of betrayal, uh, and then even just the mystique of how is wealth made in this country and how do people drive conflict to find success and find the American dream. So I feel like you see that throughout Scorsese's works.
I'm still waiting for him to make a film about the tragedy of James Dolan and the New York Knicks.
Well, I think you need a proper ending first, so let's just keep waiting.
Yes. As far as what that ending is, Knicks fans know. But anyway, Leonardo DiCaprio, overrated, underrated, or properly rated? Your thoughts?
I think properly rated. I think Leo's evolved
Yeah.
a lot over the years. When he was younger, there was a lot to develop in terms of what kind of actor was Leo going to become. And nowadays, we see a lot of that. I think he's matured immensely. Reputation aside, of course, from his Hollywood antics and his taste in women, I think that Leonardo DiCaprio has definitely impressed me quite a lot. Like he's definitely impressed me, especially as of recent years. And I'm curious to see how he represents the current guard of actors going into an older generation.
I agree. He's properly rated. When this movie came out, it was sort of public debate. Is he just a pretty boy or does he really have it? Over the next few years, when this movie came out and subsequently, he really proved that he's like, no. He's like, I do have the chops. We'll get to it a little bit later, but 2002, Gangs of New York comes out. This is also the year of my favorite Leo performance, Catch Me If You Can. I love him in that movie. Now, the
Do I
star of the
think that he
show.
showed his chops in this film? No, no.
Okay.
Let's not get ahead of ourselves.
Very good. Now, the star of the show here, Daniel Day-Lewis,
Oh,
one of the most unique careers we've ever seen. An astoundingly talented actor, and it's kind of a miracle that in the age of social media, you don't know anything about him. We know that he tried to live in Italy and make shoes at a certain point, and that's pretty much all you know about the guy. And that's what's cool about it. He's kind of like Rakim. Don't know anything
yeah.
about him.
I think that Daniel Day Lewis reminds me of maybe a if you wanted to think of like a heavyweight boxer that comes out just to fight the big fight and then wins the belt, goes
Yeah.
back into not even training, just goes back into like living. But whenever he goes into
Yeah.
the ring, he puts on a show.
He actually played a boxer in the movie The Boxer. Did you ever see it?
Never saw the boxer.
It's the movie he starred in before Gangs of New York.
Oh, I see
I've
that
never
now.
seen it either, but anything you want to add before we get into why wasn't this movie better?
Well, I've touched on it a bit, listeners, and I'm ready to defend this film. But of course, I'm very level-headed in understanding that there are certain aspects that can be better. But with that, I will do my best to defend what I can. So please, Patrick, let's go to that first reason. Why do we feel like it wasn't it better?
The troubled production. Now, the production of this movie does not come close to what we talked about for Superman 2, but it is kind of astounding. Scorsese asked for an initial budget of $83 million. Harvey Weinstein ended up having to sell the international distribution rights of this film to Graham King's Initial Entertainment Group for $65 million to secure the money that they needed. Now, shortly after this, Touchstone Pictures, which is a subsidiary of Disney, that's the company that Disney will usually release R-rated movies under, so they don't besmirch the House of Mouse with anything that's rated R. Now, they joined
Right.
Miramax in funding this film in exchange for a portion of the proceeds. With a lot of the films that we're covering, only 3 screenwriters received official credit in the end, but the screenplay went through many, many drafts. There's a lot of screenwriters' names that worked on this that never really got credit for it. Hossein Amini was one of them. He worked on this movie for at least 2 different versions of the script. And according to Tom Forty of The Independent, quote, before filming every day, Scorsese would disappear into his office and decide which version of the script to shoot, end quote. Now, we mentioned initially how this movie ended up coming out a full year after it was supposed to. So first, it went 8 weeks over schedule. The budget ballooned to $100 million. Martin Scorsese and Leonardo DiCaprio, they both had to take salary reductions to preserve the budget.
But hey, I mean, kudos to
Yeah.
them wanting to keep the movie afloat.
Yeah. Oh, look. And another quick note about DiCaprio. I think, like Scorsese, he does not do money. He does not do a movie just for a paycheck. He's motivated by other stuff. Elmer Bernstein composed the score to this movie initially. He was an old school, like legendary composer, right? But Scorsese ultimately rejected his work and decided to take a more old school approach to the music, shall we say. There's a lot of period
Right.
music that's featured in the movie. Some of it's effective, some of it's questionable. None of the reasons I just stated really, I don't think hamper this movie. You know, tons of movies go through script rewrites and stuff. That's not unusual. The biggest narrative here is that the making of this movie boiled down to a Scorsese versus Weinstein battle over the length and vision for the finished film. Also from that Independent article, there were reports of numerous points of friction, such as Weinstein turning up on set and harrying Scorsese to work faster, or that Weinstein was unhappy with Daniel Day-Lewis's less than attractive getup in the film, which he claimed wouldn't look good on a poster. Harvey Weinstein also allegedly disliked the gang name Dead Rabbits, and he discouraged the use of it, and this reportedly angered Scorsese so much that he flipped a desk during a meeting.
Yeah, let's just think for a sec the absurdity of disliking the actual name of the historic gang so much. Let's just change history for a sec. But thankfully, that didn't end up.
No, Dead Rabbits is a cool name, and shout out to the Dead Rabbit cocktail bar in Lower Manhattan. It's a very famous and very good cocktail bar. If any of the listeners are ever in
Is it in the
Manhattan,
5
check it out.
points?
It's close to it.
Okay.
And I don't know the motivation behind the foundation of that bar, but I'm sure this was considered because it's founded by a bunch of Irish guys, as far as I know. This is something that'll probably boost your opinion of Daniel Day-Lewis. He never liked Harvey Weinstein, even going back to this. Also from that article is, quote, Day-Lewis himself did not like Weinstein. Daniel Day-Lewis said this himself. What he doesn't understand is that I did gangs in spite of Harvey, not because of Harvey, end quote.
That's beautiful. With my take, the film succeeded in spite of Harvey Weinstein, but of course we can contend.
Now, the rough cut of this movie was 3 hours and 40 minutes. Because the film was Scorsese's ultimate passion project, he wanted to release the full version, but Weinstein was pushing for a more, quote, streamlined commercial version, and he wanted it to be much shorter. When it became clear that the film's original release date of Christmas 2001 was impossible, the film was delayed for a full year. Now, the official justification that the studio gave after the September 11th terrorist attacks, that's what delayed filming of the movie. That's the justification they get. I remember reading about it at the time, and I remember my dad calling bullshit. He was excited for the movie. He's like, I have to wait a year? He's like, what is this? Now, this explanation was refuted in Scorsese's own contemporary statements, where he noted that the production was still filming pickups into October 2002. Weinstein kept demanding cuts to the film's length. Some of those cuts were eventually made. This movie ended up being 2 hours, 40 minutes. There's an alleged mythical 4-hour cut of this film, but it's never seen the light of day due to the studio politics. Scorsese himself probably will never release it. In December 2001, film critic Jeffrey Wells, he reportedly saw the work print version, and he reported that it lacked Leonardo DiCaprio's voiceover narration, and it was about 20 minutes longer than what was reported. Who knows?
Interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, the film ultimately was released on Christmas 2002, within days of another DiCaprio movie, Catch Me If You Can, directed by Steven Spielberg. It's a strange decision by Miramax, I think, to release this at the same time as another DiCaprio movie. I can't imagine DiCaprio was happy with that. Studios usually will go out of their way to avoid releasing two films that one of their stars in, but they did it. You mentioned the box office when you introed this movie. It didn't even make $200 million at the box office. You've taken the budget into account, the marketing costs, and the length of the production. Gangs of New York lost a considerable amount of money. Now, the real question is, we don't have a lot of details on all this stuff, right? We have the stuff that we
Right.
read. The Independent did the most thorough investigation into this, but the real question is, whose finished film is this? It seems to be more Harvey Weinstein's.
Yeah, I think that, and this is something where you can't argue with the facts. There was a lot of compromise that had to be made at the end of the day, but that's not uncommon with films. Studios
No.
will have their say of what should be done. Directors can't always have the final say of what the vision should always eventually come out to be. But in this particular case, like it looked like, from especially from the production history, a lot of say from Weinstein that ended up hitting that, and that's what ended up hitting in theaters. Fair to say, though, I want to separate Weinstein the monster from Weinstein and the work that was done.
Right. Right.
Critically, this film did do very well. There was an Oscar bait film, and at the same time, it did receive the reception enough so from critics and going into the Oscar season to be able to drum up, what was it, 10 nominations. Of course, I always like to say that the Oscars are not the say all be all. But at the same time, there does come to a point where Weinstein did know what he was talking about, of like what was marketable, what would do well to a mass crowd to drive success in the box office. There was enough compromise that there was enough of this film that was Scorsese's, as much as we can say that this film was put out with enough that was Weinstein's.
We talk about the Oscars, I think, on every episode. It's a useful historical marker, I think. You can agree
Right.
with the wins or the losses all you want, but it is useful in terms of if you want to talk about like the history of film or the history of Hollywood, I should say, because there's plenty of films that the Academy Awards just flat out ignores. This movie to me is a classic example of too many cooks in the kitchen. It's unfathomable to me that Harvey Weinstein would make a movie with a director like Martin Scorsese and not let him make the movie that he wanted to make. It's just like, just let the guy, if he wants to make a 4-hour movie, let him make a 4-hour movie. I understand the marketability in his, but like Gangs of New York, did they ever expect this to be like a box office
It's
smash? Like it's not that kind of movie.
and funny enough, I disagree. Let's really think about the logistics. If a director wants to put out a 4-hour movie, I don't think there's not like a ton of appeal of that to a majority of audiences. I feel like there are a lot of cases where we can look at films and say, what are the most essential key parts to keep in the film? And let's put it within like a guardrail to make sure that we fit that film within a time that we can fit the essential parts into a time frame that makes sense and that we can tell the story in an effective way. I mean, even looking at the history for Matrix, right, where a film where once we give full say to the directors to come out with a film fully to the vision that they seek, we get an example of a little bit too much and not quite the same greatness when there were guardrails. So I do feel like sometimes putting limitations can allow for great creativity.
Did you just compare Martin Scorsese to the Wachowskis?
Not in the sense of one to one.
I do hear what you're saying. I just think just let Scorsese do his thing. Casino is a really long movie. That worked out pretty well.
Casino is a very long movie, but Scorsese also had a very long movie in The Irishman, and I did not like that film.
Oh, we don't need to talk about The Irishman right now.
Yeah.
I didn't like it either. We're in agreement there. Well, however much Scorsese and Weinstein clashed, regardless of how poorly they got along during the making of this, they ended up working together again 2 years later on The Aviator, which was another 3-hour movie.
Oh, seems to be a trademark.
I would love to see the work print of this movie. I don't know if it would be better or worse, but I really would like to see the Gangs of New York that Scorsese wanted to make before Harvey
So
Weinstein got his
that's
hands
so
on it.
that's so interesting. I'm not always of the mindset, right? Like more is better. I feel like even when you think of like a painting, does the bigger the canvas mean the better the painting? Not necessarily.
Not necessarily.
It's about what we can do with the medium in place. What can we do with the limits we have? And what kind of story or what kind of painting does that tell? Sure, we could have a 4-hour version and we could fit in every single idea that Scorsese had, but does that necessarily mean a better movie? Maybe.
What you're really saying is that Harvey Weinstein was the hero here.
Oh no, please do not let that come out as a quote from this. I really do not need to get canceled.
Number
Why don't
two
we move to
reason.
the why don't we
Yeah.
move to the second reason?
Storytelling and pacing. Now, you mentioned how more is probably not better. You may be right. This may be an example of it's too long and too short at the same time. And I actually have in my notes here, as repugnant as he ended up being, I do see why Weinstein wanted this to be shorter. But I'm not happy with the finished product. I think this movie suffers from some pretty poor pacing. It's a pretty long movie, but there's also parts that move too fast. This movie to me feels like a bunch of different scenes like pasted together. If you remember the recovery scenes right after Amsterdam tries to assassinate Bill in the Chinese theater, the recovery scenes where where Jenny is helping him coalesce, it kills the momentum of the movie. It's dark and there's weird slow motion and the movie just grinds to a halt.
The slow motion aspects and camera work probably they did not help with the momentum in that film at all. There were a lot of kind of questionable usage of the camera that did not help with storytelling.
Oh, do you mean like the MTV battle in the beginning?
Okay, first of all, I love the way they open that movie. I personally just thought that was great. And let's kind of use that as an example of pacing and storytelling. If the goal of the beginning is to show that this is a rift or that this is a story about revenge and what is the kind of at the core of that story, I think that the beginning captures that. Does some of it kind of come off a little bit corny with the way that Daniel Day-Lewis says we are now going to fight on these hollowed sacred grounds? A little cheesy from a line perspective, but it
A
does
little.
set the universe.
Yeah, yeah. As far as the pacing goes, there's no better example of this than 20 minutes into the movie when adult Amsterdam arrives in Manhattan. So this is our introduction to the adult protagonist, the main character of the movie, and the movie, rather than give him time to, absorb his new surroundings, the film keeps cross-cutting between him finding his way into the 5 Points and the butcher meeting with Boss Tweed. These two plot lines have nothing to do with one another. They should have been told separately in separate scenes. It's like Scorsese, he wasn't sure which one he wanted to focus on more. Like, which one am I supposed to care about as the viewer?
Yeah, I see what you're talking about here. I think like this is also something that I observed with the film, and when you look at the different scenes, wouldn't you agree there's always a lot going on in every scene going on? It's not just a focus on one character.
Yeah,
There's
that's why I mentioned I think in some parts it moves too fast.
Yeah, and like in the background, what's occurring? You see these set pieces and like this world that's very alive. And there's a lot, of course, to interpret from that in terms of there's a lot going on in this shithole that is the 5 Points. But at the same time, they're doing so many things, right? With like either soldiers getting on the boat, immigrants coming into the country, the gangs are running amok across New York. You got to watch out for the Bowery Boys. And at the same time, they're intercutting that with Leonardo DiCaprio's character and also establishing that there is a drama amok with Bill the Butcher.
There was melodrama amok, that's for sure. The exact same thing, the cross-cutting thing, that happens when the gangs are convening to discuss the upcoming battle. They keep cross-cutting to the draft, and then again when Amsterdam's preparing for the battle, the night before, it keeps cutting to the aristocrats hanging out at the Scammerhorns mansion. A lot of just strange storytelling. I don't know what I was supposed to care about. There's some cheesy stuff. You mentioned the battle, which we'll talk about a little bit more. When he arrives in Manhattan, there's that really melodramatic shot of him tossing the Bible into the water, which looks like a music video, and I guess it's cool from that perspective. But then, so he tosses the Bible away, and then he's immediately praying in his father's hideout. I don't get it. Everyone was working for the butcher. He said this. This might as well be Henry Hill working for Paulie and Goodfellas.
I thought that was actually really great. I mean, for all
Yeah.
intents and purposes, this is a Scorsese gangster film. Just of course, everyone's dressed like a dandy in the 1850s.
They were. I have questions for you about Bill the Butcher and the storytelling. So he hates the Irish like more than anything, right? But he associates with a lot of Irish people, like McGlowan. That shaved head guy, kind of looks like Phil Collins. He's part of his gang, and then he takes Amsterdam under his wing, but they don't explain why. I wanted
Right.
more of that. I'm like, he hates Irish people, but he associates with some of them. Why?
Well, so I think that that's actually part of the flaw of the character that actually makes a lot of sense. That there's a lot of deep-seated hatred for when people like xenophobia is a very clear like theme of this film. And I think one aspect that we can take away is xenophobia, or like it just does not make sense. There's a lot of irrational hatred for others that actually, when you look at it day to day, people that claim to like hate others just from where they're from may do things that contradict with that, whether that's having to actually do business with the Irish, whether you're Bill the Butcher, or showing a compassion for someone when either you don't know their actual origins and realizing that there's more connection versus differences. So I feel like that's just more of like a storytelling piece.
They didn't explain it with the Butcher though, like why. He was like a multi-layered character, but they didn't go into the many of the layers. The whole film.
I mean, I think that I think that the layers that were, or what defined Bill the Butcher was he was honorable, like he has a code of ethics that like to him mattered the most, that were also built on a very strong pride for his country. Would you agree with that? Like that kind of that is like a lot of what really is the backbone of Bill the Butcher.
Seemed to be.
So when you kind of think about that, this is a man with very strong conviction and also a man that has a lot of pride for his country. Then having a very irrational, very opinionated, very, very opinionated ideas of like what it means to be, he said it a lot, a fair native of this country, as well as what truly is honor. There is a lot of contradictions. Bill the Butcher can be a contradiction.
Yeah. As far as the storytelling goes, my other big issue with it is that the whole movie is building up to be this epic fight between the Butcher and Amsterdam and their gangs, and then the whole thing gets scuppered by the draft riots. It's building up to this boiling point, this giant battle, and then they pull a bait and switch with the draft riots, and it prevents the real battle from taking place. There's like a minor scuffle between Amsterdam and the Butcher, but instead of a real fight, we have to settle for Amsterdam putting someone out of their misery. I didn't find it fulfilling at all. And Amsterdam,
I thought, was there anything you wanted to add to that?
No, I was about to talk about Amsterdam as a character, but if you want to defend that.
I thought that was the perfect way to show that. I think that like probably there was a lot of anticipation for we should get an epic battle scene. And funny enough, I think that the opening battle probably teased that anything else like that would just be really corny. And when we really think about what is the purpose or what is the driving point of like that first battle, it's to show like, yes, there's a lot of contention. Bill the Butcher is able to get control of the 5 points. And then when you really take a look back and like think about it, how does that translate to any battle at the end? The battle at the end of the day is that this is small fry compared to what is actually the bigger scope of the government trying to drive control and order in the area. This is history being built upon the squabbles of these gangs in New York.
That's my problem
Yeah.
with exactly what film is Scorsese trying to make? Is it this revenge story, or is it the larger overall context of what's going on in New York at times? Like, pick one. It's not, it's too
I
much.
think
It's too much story for this movie.
But I think like that's part of the beauty of it is that like in the same way that we have a lot of there is a lot that there is going to be a lot of very like individual drives and desires for what like that was the defining points for all of these characters. At the end of the day it all became moot when we get to the point of, well, bigger things like government stepping in, but it is of those same drives and desires that they show, even very metaphorically, drive the bedrock and drive the foundation of what is the city in the future. And sadly, all of those same squabbles are things that we can look at today as still very much driving Americans in the same way that they were in the 1850s.
It would almost work better as a miniseries, kind of like American Gangster. It's like, I would have much rather seen a story about Bill the Butcher and his gang. I would have dropped the Amsterdam storyline completely. He's not an interesting character to me at all. I don't
I
think he's compelling. I don't like the
I don't
revenge story.
disagree. Well, so do I think that the Amsterdam character was the most compelling character? No. But I don't necessarily disagree that they shouldn't have had a character like that, or that a character like that isn't important, because the main character doesn't necessarily have to be the most interesting character, in my opinion. There's a lot of examples where there's another character that really is more interesting or really is more captivating. And a character like Amsterdam is really just someone for the audience to kind of step into and be able to step into the world and see. Because a lot of people can relate to feelings of hating someone. They can relate to the feeling of wanting revenge. So easy to step into that kind of character. And I feel like that's what drives the connection, to then be able to forget that we're watching a film and step into 1850s New York.
He's a regular Hamlet because he sure takes his time with his revenge.
Yeah, well, not to say that he's the most effective character, but hey, if you have him take his revenge in the first 30 minutes of film, you do not have.
No, that's true. I would have dropped him. What about Jenny's character? Can you defend her? Can you defend
No,
Cameron
let's
Diaz?
kick her in. Probably should have kicked her into the river.
Uh, Her character really has no reason to exist. It was like watching an MTV movie. I did not understand the Jenny Amsterdam Bill dynamic. Her comforting
No.
Bill, and then she immediately sleeps with Amsterdam, but she's also maybe got a thing with Elliot from ET.
Yeah,
Henry
not that.
Henry Thomas.
I
Yeah,
love.
that was
I
Elliot.
love that. No. I think that it was very clear that this was just trying to fit in a role for someone that was marketable,
Yeah.
but was not a very compelling character and not really a character that made sense.
The whole motivation between those three was interesting. Like, she explained her history with Bill, but then she's like, "Oh yeah, but then I was his lover when I wanted to be," and it's like, doesn't need to be in the movie. And then Johnny's motivation for betraying Amsterdam, it's not clear. He does this over Jenny, apparently. Jenny's got a I don't know. Some of the other storytelling things, I don't know if you could explain this. So Amsterdam, his plan to kill Bill at the Chinese theater, right?
Right.
He it's implied that he has like an actual plan involving other people. He seems to be collaborating with a Chinese guy who gets taken away by the butcher's men shortly before the show started. They don't explain, like, what was the plan. They never explained it. Who's the Chinese guy? They don't explain who he is. It seemed like all of that was just left on the cutting room floor. And upon rewatch, I didn't notice it initially when I watched the movie, but I noticed it upon rewatch. I'm like, did he actually have a plan with this guy? What was the guy going to do? Who was this guy? They don't elaborate on any of this.
I don't remember it like, yeah, I can't think at all what where they were going with that. I totally agree. That did not make sense.
Another part of the thing that didn't make sense to me. So Amsterdam, he gets exposed, right? He gets gutted by a knife. He gets his face burned by a hot knife by Bill. It never occurs to him to find out who betrayed him to the butcher. He's like, oh, I guess the game's up. Like, but then later Johnny admits to him that it was him, and Amsterdam just forgives him. Plot hole.
Plot hole, but at the same time, I think that there's probably at the same time, while I find it not making sense, I think it's supposed to show that Amsterdam is a very forgiving character, and at the same time, this touches on Amsterdam being very conflicted about who he trusts and who he's began to trust. It's also that point in the film that Amsterdam was kind of, it was hinted a lot in the film, like actually grew very fond of Bill the Butcher. So someone that he hates actually starts to become fond of. Someone that he thought he could trust suddenly was someone that he could not trust. I wouldn't be very surprised if he's like, wait, I can forgive this person. This is someone that like I've trusted for a while. Yeah.
You can see where they probably left a lot of stuff on the cutting room floor. You can see the gaps that I think should have been filled in. Now, after Amsterdam reforms the Dead Rabbits, Jenny, she is actively participating in their shenanigans. And then, randomly, the night before the big battle, she just randomly comes to say goodbye to him. It comes out of nowhere. You can tell there's a missing scene or two that should have filled that gap. And
now,
when
are we complaining that it's a goodbye of her character?
No, I couldn't wait for her to go away. When the draft riots actually start, I didn't have any idea what was going on except for the exposition provided by the telegraph operator that was narrating the events. Like, this gang's doing this. They're raiding the circus. This is how I talk, see? Meh. It's very awkward exposition. There's a lot of, cross-cutting to the stuff in the mansions with the upper class people. Doesn't really have anything to do with the plot. And then, What do you think about the voiceover narration from DiCaprio?
I am always very against voiceover narration for exposition. In general, I find it very lazy.
You didn't like it when he was explaining what kind of pickpocket Cameron Diaz's character was?
Again,
the different kinds of police.
Lazy.
Yeah, it's a voiceover narration in a movie approaching 3 hours is it's pushing it for me.
I was gonna say, of course, it's a compromise. Probably there's less time. There's less time to show, like, hey, this policeman is doing something good, and showing that, and then showing an example of a policeman doing bad versus just saying it. There's good police. There's bad police.
I say ditch the romance. Get rid of the voiceover narration from Amsterdam. Get rid of all the exposition to shrink this down to like 130 minutes. You got a stew cooking. There's a good movie in here.
I do agree with one part, ditching the romance, or at least figuring out a way to like make it fit in better. And
you don't need it at all. You don't need it. You don't need her character in the movie. She adds nothing to the movie.
I think that there's probably better ways to visually show the exposition. Or maybe certain things don't need exposition at all, if you know what I mean. Like certain things, like when you look at a painting, do you need everything in the painting explained? Or do you just consume the piece as a whole and figure out, like, is it in a series of paintings? What is the story being told? So I feel like there was a lot of room where we can trust as an audience to be able to put things together, or at the same time, it's fine to leave mystery be. It's fine to let a mystery be there, because that's where the imagination and interpretation can come into play.
Number 3 reason why I don't think this was better, the directing from Scorsese. Now, before I elaborate on this, I do feel for Scorsese. I just want to say that. This was his career-long passion project, and he had to deal with that ogre Weinstein, who seems like just butchered the movie. Scorsese was obsessed with making Gangs of New York, but I don't think it's about Gangs of New York, the Gangs of New York. Something I found quite revealing. I actually listened to the director's commentary on this. I have this movie on the ancient digital video disc from the early 2000s. Scorsese goes into a lot of detail about the history of New York and the gangs, which is really interesting. He doesn't say a lot about the making of the movie. He talks about the actors a lot, but I wonder if the drama that he had with Weinstein played into him just not wanting to talk about it. You like this movie a lot more than I do. You should listen to the commentary. It's pretty insightful.
I'll listen to the commentary.
Yeah, he's interesting just to hear from for 2+ hours. He's just a cool guy, Scorsese. Visually, I would say one of, if not the best looking Scorsese movie that I've seen. It looks positively Victorian. It really does look like it was filmed like on a real location. It's beautifully shot by Michael Ballhaus, the cinematographer. Really good use of the color red. I mentioned the production design, painstakingly recreated 19th century New York. Same thing with the costumes. There's been a little criticism I've read online about like you mentioned how they all dress like dandies, but apparently it's authentic. You do feel like you're transported back in time. Technically, this is a really, really good film.
Yeah, just one of the reasons why I love this film is just it does such a great job of really transporting you. And I think that there's such an art to the cinematography, the set design, the costuming, and I really do think this deserved an Oscar for that. Just it was gorgeous what they were doing with this film. And the
Yeah,
use of color, like you said.
we had we hammered on it a little bit earlier, and it's the opposite of Superman 2. Like, this is a great example of how good a movie filmed entirely on set can be.
Yeah.
This is like the ceiling for that, or one of the most impressive. I'm trying to think what's the best production design I've ever seen in a movie. Like maybe Blade Runner. It's some of the best use of sets I've ever seen. This is up there though.
One of my favorite scenes in this film was the failed assassination attempt, and Leonardo DiCaprio is like on the butcher's block basically, and Bill the Butcher's putting on a show for everyone. And I thought that that was just beautifully shot in the camera work, and also some of the best, like when I think about some of my favorite lines from the film, also within that same scene.
There's a really cool shot in that scene when he throws the knife up in the air, and it cuts to slow motion, and you see the layers of spectators in the theater's gallery, and the knife is like twirling in slow motion by them. It's a really cool shot from Scorsese.
Yeah, I was doing some research on like what to look at when looking at cinematography of the film, and what does that actually have to say about like the composition of a shot, and what does that say about like the storytelling. And something to kind of look back on when watching that scene is the position of power that Bill the Butcher has when you look at those different shots. You actually feel like you're Leo's character on the butcher block, with Bill the Butcher being so domineering in those scenes. Actually, even in the positioning, you feel like you're the one that that has the butcher's blades aimed at you, and while he's threatening to cut into you. Of course, and I'll end here. One of my favorite lines of the film. What should I cut out? His heart. This boy has no heart. Amazing.
That was cool. That was memorable. Scorsese, I don't know what story he was ultimately trying to tell. I wish we knew before Harvey, chopped it up. You got this revenge story, but it's called Gangs of New York. But it's not really about the gangs. It's sort of about the gangs, but it's about this revenge. We get 30 minutes of exposition. None of it matters. Did you remember the scene early on when Johnny's giving Amsterdam a tour of the 5 points? He's talking about all the different gangs, and you're like, oh, great. This is Gangs of New York. Finally, we're getting to see it. But none of the gangs actually matter. They don't have any impact on the plot. They never make another appearance except at the end when they're conveniently needed for the battle. I wish that Scorsese had incorporated them more into the plot. It ultimately boils down to a Amsterdam versus Bill type of movie.
I think like kind of there's a few things to think about there. Expectations for like what is the story being told versus what is the story setting. I think that to say Gangs of New York doesn't it's like if you try to think of this story, it's almost very Shakespearean, right? You actually said Hamlet.
Yeah.
There's a very classic tale of revenge here. Now, of course, one would say, hey, there's a bunch of gangs here. Why not utilize them in forms of the plot, or have them move along like more of the story? But really, it's a period piece. Focus on a few characters and the motivations of those characters. It just so happens that those same motivations are shared by folks that were in gangs in New York in the 1850s. I think that's to me my interpretation, that there were very clear human motivations of these people that people can relate to, even though it was like over like 200 years ago.
I hear you on that. Legendary screenwriter William Goldman, he infamously hated this movie, and here's what he had to say, which sort of echoes my thoughts about the storytelling. Quote, "What story, though? The lack of an answer is what demolishes the movie. Is it about gang warfare, family revenge, Irish immigration, the Civil War, the draft, political corruption, prejudice? These subjects and more, all of them valid enough alone, flicker in and out, never accumulating or connecting one to the other. End quote.
That's fair. I think that probably this is that's one of those aspects where, funny enough, I think would have even made people more confused if this was a 4-hour film. If you almost think, hey, let's give them 4 hours to try to explain every single different plot point or theme that we're kind of touching on in the film, you give it 4 hours, we're probably going to be more confused because we're trying to even interconnect more of these themes together. I think that it's fine to have these touch on these themes and say that this is something that were key motivations or things that were very much driving a lot of the contention of the time period. But then to not necessarily have a clear answer, I think is more so actually up for interpretation for like what was the point. I think even the way that it ended, showing that it was like pointless, almost was the point. Again, I know that that's my interpretation, that a lot of it was futile. What I think like the irony of it is that those same things that were driving the driving motivations, you can see a lot of those parallels today, which almost is saying a lot of it is futile. It's people are going to keep fighting over these kind of same key aspects.
Fair. I give Scorsese a lot of credit for building this historical epic. It's a part of New York history that really isn't found in a lot of history books, and I do give him credit for that.
Yeah.
You may agree with what Roger Ebert had to say about this. He said, quote, "All of this is a triumph for Scorsese, and yet I do not think this film is in the first rank of his masterpieces. It's very good, but not great. I wrote recently of Goodfellas that the film has the headlong momentum of a storyteller who knows that he has a good one to share. I didn't feel that here." End quote.
That's, yeah, like I see where I see where Roger Ebert's coming from. Maybe it wasn't the most concise story, but I think that that comes with an epic period piece, and why I think that having more limits can make for more of an effective story. I like to think of
Maybe it
it
wasn't
as,
limited enough.
yeah, maybe. I do think that I like to go back to that metaphor of is a bigger canvas better for a painting? And I don't think so, right? I do think that the limits in place can help make for creative storytelling. But this was also just a lot to bite through. And there was a lot to it was a lot to chew through.
You're doing a great job defending all this.
Oh, I really appreciate that.
Yeah. Yeah. I last but not least, I would like to talk about the acting. And I think this is probably where you and I are going to disagree the most. And I would imagine most people are going to this is a scorching hot take that I'm about to
Okay,
drop.
go for it.
Daniel Day-Lewis is astounding in this movie. He's throwing 1,000,000 miles an hour in every scene. And yet I do not love him in this movie. I think it's too much. He is doing this big, obnoxious, melodramatic overacting. He's not listening to anyone. He has to compete and dominate with every single actor around him. He's shouting at everyone. I have in my notes here, he's ball hogging like Russell Westbrook. Maybe because he needed to, maybe because he wanted to. And some of this maybe isn't his fault. None of his fellow actors are matching his intensity, apart from perhaps Brendan Gleeson, who's only in a handful of scenes.
Mm-hmm.
I find his performance to be pure melodrama. It's a very memorable performance, but he is shouting at everyone he's talking down to every single person in every single scene. I almost felt like I was watching a
Yeah.
cartoon character.
So what's funny is I hear what you're saying, especially with the performance. It was a very funny enough, there are scenes where he is shouting, but there are other scenes where it feels like he's shouting. And I feel like that's just the intensity. In some
Oh,
scenes, he's very much quiet, but this is kind of the beauty of Daniel Day-Lewis. It's being able to emote with ferocity, to be able to have a scene where he commands the camera and then commands the viewer's attention by saying a few lines, taking a knife and then poking at his glass eye and using that to tell a point. Bill the Butcher himself was the character, someone that had to command the respect of the gangs under his control. And I feel like if the point was someone that truly was a showman, someone that was truly capturing their respect by driving the fact that he was more like was something maybe more than life, bigger than the moment itself. I think that Daniel Day-Lewis captured that. I mean, I think some of it is even captured in the scene where, right, like the how does Bill the Butcher what is the real reason Bill the Butcher has like a yearly what is it, ceremony to honor his fallen rival, Priest Valen? What is the real reason for that?
Because he's an egotistical sociopath.
So that's like one would say like, yeah, so that's one, I'd say
I'm
one
just
reason.
I'm being a dick. I know what you're saying
Right,
because
right, no, but like
he's a
the
man of
second, but
conviction. Yeah.
right, man of so, but the second reason, it's not really out of respect for his rival. That's what he says, right? It's because he respects Priest Valen and wants to do it to his honor. One could definitely say he's egotistical, but also so that everyone remembers that he is a badass and that
Yeah.
everyone remembers that he will cut down his opponents. And as a showman, he's establishing himself with that performance every time. Does he have to throw does he have to throw the cleaver in the air when he's doing that thing with Amsterdam, showing him off to the crowd? No, but it's establishing that this character is a showman that is driving the ferocity. So I'll just end it there. I think that hamming it up is very clear. It may seem very loud, but very effective if we think of Bill the Butcher as the showman that he is.
I'm not saying it's a bad performance. It's by far the best acting in the film. And I'm actually surprised he did not win the Oscar for it. I always saw this as a prototype for what he would do much better several years later in There Will Be Blood, which I think a lot of people would agree that's his best performance. He has such a high batting average. He's not in a lot of movies and he always knocks it out of
No,
the
but
park. But his performance in this movie, it made me think of something that filmmaker Irvin Kershner once said. Kershner was a director. He directed The Empire Strikes Back and the offshoot Bond movie Never Say Never Again, which we're going to cover at some point. Now, he was giving a director's commentary track for Never Say Never Again. He was specifically talking about the difference between Sean Connery and Klaus Maria Brandauer. How Connery will try to involve other actors around him and play off them, and sort of a teamwork approach where Brandauer will try to use other actors to their advantage. And he said, quote, Sean needs very little direction after the rehearsal. He very rarely misses a beat. Someone like Klaus needs to be very carefully handled. He'll go too far and almost make a caricature out of it because of his range is so great. He can do anything you want. Sean is not competitive with other actors. He works with other actors. He's very generous with other actors. Klaus is trying to be the best. He's trying to compete with those around him. He doesn't work with other actors. He uses them. End quote. I heard that a little while
interesting.
back on this commentary track, and it always stuck with me. And I thought of it immediately when I was rewatching this movie for this podcast. It seemed like, to me at least, Daniel Day-Lewis was using other actors and trying to dominate them. Now, maybe that ended up working well for him, right? Because it is a very memorable performance. But there are at least one other person on the internet agrees with me on this. Felix Quineros from Medium says, quote, with his glass eye, greasy hair, and crazy mustache, he almost looks like a caricature of a person. Even before he says one word, you can't help but be captivated by him. Bill the Butcher is also the kind of character that doesn't really have conversations. Instead, he gives monologues. He's a guy who looks crazy, yells a lot, and is always giving impassioned speeches. That's not to say that Daniel Day-Lewis isn't great at it, but being so over the top ensures the performance gets stuck in your head, end quote. That's exactly how I feel.
Interesting. Yeah, no, I think it's a I agree that it's a over the top performance, and I think very fitting for the character.
The other performances in this movie, DiCaprio, pretty forgettable here. I think he gets entirely overshadowed by Daniel Day-Lewis. Now, it was pretty early in his career. I like to think that he learned a lot from starring in this. And it's interesting because early in the film, after they meet, Bill the Butcher describes his character, Amsterdam, as having, quote, murderous rage. But you never get any notion of that from DiCaprio. He doesn't do anything for the rest of the movie
Yeah,
to really back that up.
There's a look that DiCaprio does a lot in the film where he like kind of squints and like purses his lips like a lot in this film. And I feel like it didn't really add to the character at all, but it's something that I've noticed. It's kind of a it's an aspect of DiCaprio's, like, I think it's in Leonardo DiCaprio's tool belt that you'll see a lot in his films. Just an observation. But one, I think I go back to my same reason from before. This was a character for the audience to step into, to relate to then understand and be able to look through the lens of and into the world. A lot of people can easily relate. A lot of people can easily relate to those base human desires, and then be able to like see from that perspective what is the world of Gangs of New York. So while not the strongest character, I think that probably did the job of being able to provide a main character that's more of a canvas to interpret, and or sorry, more of a lens to look through than an actual driver and motivator.
It's not one of my favorite DiCaprio performances for sure. What are your favorite ones that he did? Because he's done so
Catch Me
many.
If You Can, Blood Diamond,
Wolf
Wolf
of
of
Wall
Wall
Street.
Street, Django,
Yeah. Titanic.
Titanic. I didn't love him in Titanic. I thought it was fun in Titanic, but I didn't love him. Another one I loved him in. I love him in was Inception.
Amazing. It's
Yeah.
actually, I think it's an underrated Leo performance.
Oh, it was fantastic.
He's so good in that. I remember him being great in The Aviator, but I haven't seen it since it came out.
That one was weird. But I think like that was weird for me just because I also like I read a lot of books about Howard Hughes, and then watching the film I was like I think I was just more disappointed with how that whole story just carried out.
I don't remember much about it. I kind of want to see it again. He's great in The Departed too.
Yep, fantastic.
Body of Lies. Did you ever see that one?
Never saw Body of Lies. Maybe
He's
that
in it
one.
with our boy Russell Crowe.
Okay.
Pretty good. It's a Ridley
Romeo
Scott
plus
movie.
Juliet.
Yes, I. That is the proper way to represent that.
Was that the
Uh,
same director of Moulin Rouge?
yeah, Baz Luhrmann
Yeah, I thought so.
and The
That
Great
was
Gatsby, which DiCaprio is good in that one too.
oh, and then that one I'm trying to remember who else was in that film. The
In
original Luigi was in that film, wasn't it?
John Leguizamo.
Yeah, it was. Yeah,
Yeah,
he
he
was,
plays.
wasn't he?
Doesn't he play Mercutio?
And he had that scene in the beginning of the film where he's pointing two guns. Like,
Yeah,
I need to watch that film again. That was great.
I have not seen it since high school, and our English teacher in 11th grade or whatever was trying to keep us interested in Shakespeare, and he's like, I
Yeah,
guess I'll just show him the MTV version of this movie. I kind of
we
liked it though.
had
I haven't
a
seen it since then, but
we had a unit I remember in English where it was comparing it was looking at the different interpretations of Romeo and Juliet. So I
Cameron
remember
Diaz
that one from
stinks in
that.
this movie.
Oh gosh, the less we say about that, the better.
That's the one I like how even before we started recording, you're like, this is the one thing I can't defend. Yeah, did you like her Irish accent?
The one that like never really stuck.
No, it ebbed and flowed.
I think that it was that, and like what's funny is I've talked about this before. There was a really there was Hellcat Mary or Hellcat Maggie, who was like the Wolverine-esque character who had fought in the original first battle and then just was featured through the film having like the metal claws. I was like, this has to be a made-up character, but based on some truth. Always thought that was weird.
Yeah, it seemed like most of the characters were at least had a foundation in reality. Like Boss Tweed is obviously a pretty well-known
Right.
figure in New York City history. That's one of the better supporting performances in the movie, I think. Jim Broadbent, pretty entertaining when
Mm-hmm.
he tells, wow, what's that line he says? The presence of the law being upheld must be maintained even when it's being broken. I like that line.
Right.
And there was some other. I mean, Brendan Gleeson's great in it. He's not in it much. Liam Neeson's great in the opening. Obviously, he's always great, even when he's playing Qui-Gon Jinn. And then John C. Reilly, he is a really good actor. And here's some trivia time for you, Anton. Including this film, John C. Reilly starred in 3 films in 2002 that were nominated for Best Picture at the Oscars. Can you name the other 2? And I'll give you a hint. He got a Best Supporting Actor nomination for one of them.
Oh man. Oh, Chicago.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's the one he got nominated for.
Yeah.
And he was in another movie that was also nominated for Best Picture.
Oh man, what was the one nominated for Best Picture?
I'll give you a hint. Nicole Kidman won Best Actress for starring in this movie.
Oh, I really should know this. I feel so dumb. If what was it? What was
The
it?
Hours.
That's right. That's right.
Pretty good year for John C. Reilly. It's very rare that an actor will be in 3 movies nominated for Best Picture in the same year. It's pretty amazing.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. I mean, John C. Reilly's just fantastic. I think
Yeah.
like because I knew him as a dramatic actor or a more quote unquote serious actor
Yeah.
before seeing him in comedy, I think that I just had that much more respect for him.
He can do it all.
Bit very quite the range. Not just Dr. Steve Brule.
No. Well, that's it for my reasons. Is there anything you want to add before we talk about do we like this movie and we can we can wrap this up?
No, let's jump into it. Patrick, did you like it?
No. Given
No.
who made this, who starred in it and what it was about, this should have been a masterpiece. This should have been an A movie on paper. It should have been a 5-star movie. The historical backdrop is very interesting. The visuals are very good, but I found the story astoundingly boring. It's too long. I think it's poorly paced. It's very disjointed to me. I dislike it even more because of how much better I think it should have been. I really wanted to like this movie. I was so excited to like this movie when I first saw it. Just like with American Gangster, the consensus seems to be this is a good movie with a quote unquote incredible Daniel Day-Lewis performance, but it's somehow just being and it somehow ends up being on the lower end of the Scorsese quality spectrum. Now, I will give it credit for its ambition. It's a very ambitious movie. Daniel Day-Lewis, it's a very memorable performance. I do find Leonardo DiCaprio lacking. Cameron Diaz is terribly miscast. And I gotta say, as a fan of Scorsese, Daniel Day-Lewis, DiCaprio, John C. Reilly, Liam Neeson, I have to admit I was very disappointed by this. I think it's one of the biggest misfires of the 2000s. It's pure melodrama to me. The historical scope, it's impressive. I give it credit for that. But the story and the characters, I found uneven. It's an interesting movie to rewatch because of all the stars that are in it, but I didn't find it entertaining. I mentioned it before when we talked about what could have been and what Weinstein did to it. There's a great film in there somewhere, but I don't think we're ever going to see it. I give this a rating of a C minus. I don't even find it average.
Um, well, very fair assessment. This is me going in, and I actually want to start with a shout out to my guy Daniel Day Lewis for saying this and really giving me inspiration. Of I feel like this film succeeded despite Harvey Weinstein and despite the flaws, that you touched on. I think that to me this was a gorgeous film that despite the flaws was able to really show like really transport the viewer into a time that was a disjointed mess. And I feel like when you think of the metaphor of what the when we think of the 5 points and that time period and the themes that the film tried to touch on, it was a lot. But at the same time, when you think of a painting as a whole, there's so much to interpret. And I feel like this film did such a fantastic job of being able to capture the beauty that was the mess of that time period. And I think that what was something that I really enjoyed from that film was the performances that were able to shine through, and really had such strong staying power to this day. Daniel Day Lewis, Leonardo DiCaprio doing a strong part in what I interpret as a role that was meant to be a lens for the viewer to really see the world that was the gangs in New York. I have nothing to say about Cameron Diaz and that performance, but I'd say despite that, this was a film that really was able to transport the viewer and show that during this time period, there were these themes of xenophobia, revenge, striving for what is the American dream that is a lot of parallel into still what is in the mindset of the American people today. So, despite what ended up coming out, I feel like, and despite what the film faced in the production, And the flaws that it has. It is by no means a perfect film, but one that I can continuously look back on and admire because of just the beautifully shot film that it is. I have to give it a B plus. I really do enjoy this film.
Well said. So you
Yeah.
consider this highly rewatchable.
Oh, absolutely. I think that it's just, yeah, I can always go back to this film.
Well, I respect it. I will never return to this movie. Sometimes you got to be in the right mood to watch a movie. B plus, fair enough. That's definitely our biggest disagreement on ratings. Interesting.
I think like too, and this is more, maybe I'm a little bit biased, but something I touched on before was I do have a strong fascination with the history on the East Coast. And just because it's so much older than the rest of the country, that there is just so much there for like the rich history of really what developed, of like what developed our country. And I feel like that's also shared with Scorsese, even though a lot of it is seedy, a lot of it is hard to look at or hard to know the truth of. I feel like that's something that's like very fascinating to analyze and to actually see that on the big screen. Like, there's not a lot of films that portray that. There's not a lot of films that really capture that. So
That's
for
true.
me, it's just like something that really does interest me. It was a time period that doesn't get a lot of love.
Well, this may interest you. There is apparently a Gangs of New York series in development. It's supposed to come out
Okay,
sometime
maybe
later
I'll give
this
it a
year
shot.
or early next year. I don't know. Could be interesting. There's a lot you could do with that premise for sure.
We shall see.
And that's it for this edition of Why Wasn't It Better? As always, this podcast was produced by Eric Taylor. You can find him on Instagram and Spotify at Might Be Thunder. We will see you next time.
All right, take care, everyone. Bye.